The 20th century Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova was considered the most famous dancer of her time. People adored her. Chefs named dishes after her, including a very famous dessert called Pavlova. Now, it's basically a meringue filled with cream and berries or other fruit, and both the Australians and New Zealanders claim it as their own. We're going to talk about that another day. Today, I just want to eat it and make one with Julia. She's going to show us a great version.
That's right, and it all comes down to that meringue. That is the most technical part of this recipe, though technical does not mean hard. We wanted to make it foolproof. And so when you're thinking about meringue, there's really just two ingredients, egg whites and sugar, but it's how you mix these two together that makes all the difference.
Okay.
So we're going to start with 3/4 of a cup of egg whites, and that's anywhere from 5 to 7 eggs, depending on how large they are. We're going to add 1½ cups of granulated sugar. We tested slightly lower amounts, but we found that 1½ cups is the right amount because it makes the crust good and crisp. All right, here I have a saucepan with about 1 inch of water. We're just going to put it at a bare simmer. This is basically a double boiler. We're going to put this right on top, and that gentle heat will slowly heat up the egg whites. And I have a thermometer here because we want to go 160 to 165 degrees. That's the magic temperature. Now, if you were to look up recipes, you'll find that many of them cook this mixture to a lower temperature, around 140. But when we did that, we found the meringue had a pock-marked sort of coarse texture. Increasing the temperature to 160 made it nice and smooth and creamy. So that's what we're going to do. That takes about 5 to 8 minutes.
So let's take a closer look at why 160 degrees is the right temperature to cook our eggs and sugar to. Egg white proteins start out as tightly wound molecules, like balls of string. When they're whipped, the proteins uncoil into strands. Then they slowly start to link up or coagulate at around 140 degrees. They form a loose protein mesh. If instead you bring the meringue up to 160 degrees, the whites will coagulate more, weaving together into a tighter mesh. Later, as the meringue bakes, the knitted proteins squeeze out water, and the water turns to vapor. In a meringue that's cooked to 140 degrees, the loose protein mesh stretches and breaks during baking, forming irregular air pockets. This leads to a coarse final texture in the baked meringue. But in a meringue that's cooked to 160 degrees, the tighter, stronger protein mesh doesn't stretch or break as easily. The expanding vapor can only create small, fine-textured air pockets that are even throughout the meringue. This leads to a pavlova with a final texture that is uniformly fine and airy. So those 20 degrees make a big difference. Crank the heat up to 160 degrees.
That mixture has registered 160, starting to climb to 165, which is perfect. Now we're going to whip it until it's nice and fluffy and glossy, and that takes about 4 minutes. I'm going to do that on high speed. All right. Now we're just going to add a few more ingredients. The first one is vanilla, which is for flavor. This is a teaspoon of vanilla extract. These last two are quite unusual, common for pavlova, but quite uncommon for meringue.
Okay.
So the first one is cornstarch. Now, the cornstarch gives it a little structure, and especially that chewy part right under the crust. This is 1½ teaspoons of cornstarch, and this last one is vinegar. Now, vinegar helps keep that very center creamy and luscious. So when you take it out, you almost get more like a nougat. This is 1½ teaspoons of white distilled vinegar. So I'm just going to turn this mixer back on to high for about 10 seconds to incorporate those last few ingredients. All right, it's done.
Beautiful and glossy.
So now it's time to take this meringue and make it into a nice flat cake layer. So what I have here is a piece of parchment paper, and I've traced a 10-inch circle on it, and this is going to be our template for making the meringue cake.
Gotcha.
I'm just going to take a little bit of the meringue, and I'm going to dab it in the corners, because this will help anchor that parchment. And obviously, the stencil side is going down, so it won't leach onto the meringue, but you can still see the outline nicely through the parchment. All right, and so now I'm just going to take all this meringue, I'm just going to pile it into the center of my stencil. So now I'm just going to take the spatula and working from the center, I'm just going to sort of push it out. I'm going to spin the tray as I go. Now this is not a precise dessert. It's going to get a little cracked. If it looks a little rustic, that's okay. The beauty is in it being rustic. So I'm just going to work from the center out. Now I'm just going to use the back of a spoon. I want to make the center of it a little lower than the edges because that's where that whipped cream and the fruit's going to rest. So I'm going to give it a nice little bed. And the wall should be about 1 inch high. All right, so this is ready for the oven. It's going to be a very low oven, 250 degrees, so that it dries out for about 1.5 hours right on the middle rack. Oh, beautiful, isn't
Heavenly.
it? The way you can tell it's done is not by browning, because you can see it doesn't have much color. But you're gonna take a spatula and very gently just put it under the edge and see if you can lift it up as a whole piece, just like that. It'll start to release from the parchment. That is perfect. You don't want to cook it any longer or it'll get too hard.
Okay.
But it's still quite wet on the very inside. So we're gonna dry it out. And with that wooden spoon propped right in the door, we're gonna turn the oven off and let it dry out and cool down again for another hour and a half.
Okay.
And while that happens, we're gonna focus on the fruit on the top. Now, a lot of classic pavlovas use tropical fruit. As you said, it was popular in New Zealand. But we're gonna do something decidedly North American. We're gonna do cranberries with oranges, sort of end-of-the-year holiday flavors. This is about 1.5 cups of frozen cranberries, and they're a little too tart right out of the bag to put them on the pavlova. So we're gonna give them a little sugar bath. So I have a cup of water, and this is a cup of sugar, and we're just gonna bring it to a boil over medium heat. That came to a boil pretty quickly. Now we're gonna add the frozen cranberries. We're gonna turn the heat off. You don't want the cranberries to burst open, you want them to stay as whole berries.
Gotcha.
So they're just gonna sit off the heat in this simple syrup and cool down for about half an hour. All right, that's nice and cool. Now we're gonna drain the syrup away. So I'm gonna take just 1/2 cup of these and we're gonna coat them with sugar just to help garnish the finished meringue. I'm gonna shake them around.
So pretty.
Put them out on a plate. It's so elegant. They almost look like they're dusted with snow. And this will dry for about an hour. When we come back, we can assemble the meringue. All right, so our pavlova is on its stage, ready to be topped with whipped cream and some fruit. So let's make the whipped cream.
All right.
So I have 2 cups of heavy cream here, and it's nice and chilled, so it'll whip better. And I'm gonna start it on low for about 30 seconds. I'm gonna add just a little bit of sugar. This is 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. So 30 seconds on low, 30 seconds on medium, and then the last 20 seconds or so on high. All right. I always like to do the last bit by hand, because if you over whip cream, it gets all chunky looking. Oh, all right, that is perfection. Now it's time to finish our fruit. And I mentioned earlier that we're doing oranges and cranberries, so we're just gonna use navel oranges, and 5 navel oranges in total. So you wanna trim off the top and bottom of the orange, then follow the curve of the orange with your knife. I'm not gonna segment them as you would for a salad, but rather I want some of the segments to hold together. So I'm gonna quarter it lengthwise and slice it about 1/4 inch thick. To this, we're gonna add the remaining unsugared cranberries.
Right. These were just soaked in that water and sugar syrup, but not rolled in the sugar.
That's it. And a lot of mint. This is 1/3 cup freshly chopped mint.
Getting better.
I know. All right, so our fruit's ready, our whipped cream's ready, and our meringue has cooled for at least 15 minutes out of that oven. Right out of the oven, it's a little warm. You don't want to assemble it just right away. So first on is the whipped cream. I'm just gonna pile it right into the center. I'm just gonna use a spatula to push out the whipped cream just to the edges. I want it to peek out from underneath that fruit a little bit. This meringue actually needs about 5 minutes at least to absorb some of that moisture from the whipped cream, so it's easier to serve. All right, so it's been sitting for 5 minutes. Time to garnish and taste.
5 miserable minutes.
So now's when you put on these beautiful sugared berries, very holiday. Put them on too soon, they will melt.
Gotcha.
And last but not least, a few whole mint leaves, just sprinkled around, adding just a nice hit of color here and there, as though they blew in off the wind. So using a serrated knife is key here for serving it.
I can positively tell you that I am not worried about a perfect slice, and yet you delivered.
Your wait is over, my friend.
This is the perfect dessert. It's got that crisp, sugary layer underneath of the meringue. A little bit of chew still in there. The whipped cream just adds a lot of richness without adding too much sweetness, because in comes that little bit of tangy cranberry and the tart orange as well. This is showstopper. It just doesn't do it justice.
It doesn't, does it?
I would say brava, Julia. This beautiful pavlova starts with meringue. Heat sugar and egg whites, then whip them until fluffy and add vinegar and cornstarch. Spoon it all into a circle, bake it, and then cool in the oven. Meanwhile, stir cranberries into heated sugar water and then roll them in sugar for a garnish. Whipped cream, spoon into the middle of the meringue, and then top with oranges, cranberries, and of course, mint. Garnish with those sugared berries and serve. So from America's test kitchen to your kitchen, orange, cranberry, and mint pavlova with whipped cream. Stunning.
Thanks for watching America's Test Kitchen. What'd you think?
Well, leave a comment and let us know which recipes you're excited to make, or you can just say hello.
You can find links to today's recipes and reviews in the video description.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
See you later.
I'll see you later.